I'm a BI and GP consultant here at IBIS, and I've been working with the analysis cubes the entire time I've been working with IBIS. So I'm pretty familiar with them, and if you have any questions after the webinar, feel free to email the email that will be available at the very end of the webinar presentation. Alright, so what are analysis cubes for Excel and why do you need them? Is the title of my presentation. So what are analysis cubes? Analysis cubes are primarily an ad hoc reporting tool. This would be in addition to any of your existing reporting tools. So it wouldn't necessarily take the place of Management Reporter or any of your other, if you're still on FRX, or any of your other reporting capabilities. This would add additional functionality. The people that tend to use this tool are managers, C-levels, as well as just a data analyst. A lot of times someone who's developing the report will develop it, their role is more of a data analyst, and then they will hand it up to their boss or to a C-level so that they can refresh the report as often as they'd like. Analysis cubes are accessed through Excel, that's why they're called analysis cubes for Excel. So you have the data visibility as well as the Excel functionality. So you have all of the basic Excel tools, the pivot tables, the charts, the graphs, formulas. So you're able to take this data and put it straight into Excel, something that you're really familiar with working with, most likely. The other thing that analysis cubes is great for is data visibility. So like I mentioned earlier, you have the ability to do ad hoc reporting. You have all the data within your data source. I spend a lot more time in GP than anything else. There are the cubes available in AX as well. And we have in the past done some custom data coming from CRM as well as other source systems. It doesn't necessarily have to be Dynamics GP. So that's just something to keep in mind. A really cool thing about analysis cubes that most people don't realize is it's already part of your software. If you've downloaded GP, you have a copy of analysis cubes, and it's just waiting to be installed. Why should IBIS help me install the cubes? So the default cubes that I just mentioned that are within the download of GP, you can install them. You can try to use them, but there's a couple bugs, and IBIS will be here to help you solve those. From our work in the past, we have identified quite a little list of items that we improved. So they're not necessarily wrong, a couple of joins are wrong, and we'll help you through that. So the IBIS modifications have been done to the default reporting tools, and we've also created some custom cubes. We have them for fixed assets as well as project accounting that we can deploy. We've also done customized cubes in the past for CRM and a couple modifications to the base cubes. So the next thing I want to talk about is visualizing analysis cubes and what they actually are. When you open Excel after installing cubes, it's going to look pretty automagic, and that's because it is. But I want to talk about the back end first. So the first place you're going to start with is your source system. In my case, and for the examples today, we're going to be using GP as the source system. You can include any other source system, that would be AX, CRM, or a custom source if you really want to get really in-depth in the cubes. The next step is to push that data through integration services. So if you're not very techy, integration services is a tool that allows you to select a source system and a destination. So it's going to take all of your data from GP and copy it over to another database. And that's going to be called your data warehouse. So if you've ever opened the GP database, you'll see a lot of tables that have names that don't always make sense. A SOP table will be called SOP 10100. The data warehouse is going to take all of that data and load it into a little bit more organized fashion. It's going to pull all of your GL information into the GL transaction table. So that will include your open as well as your history tables consolidated into one. The data warehouse is also going to copy data from multiple locations. In terms of GP, that means multiple databases. So instead of having 3 separate GP source databases that you either have to write a query from individually and consolidate, or write a smart list builder and consolidate. Everything's right here in the data warehouse. It pulls in each company that you've included in the install, and it puts that data in the same table with a company identifier. Analysis services is what actually holds the logic of the cubes. So when I use the word cubes, I'm referring to the analysis services piece, and that's the logic that ties everything together. So I know that my salespeople are related to my sales documents. So it's a little complicated to look at right here with all of the lines, but this is the link that connects everything together. So instead of having multiple tables in my GP database, I now have a couple of tables in my data warehouse that I can logically join together. And then after that occurs, you'll be able to get your data straight into Excel and use the power of pivot tables, pivot charts, and cube formulas to reach that data. So all the steps that I've gone over, all these little boxes, is going to refresh nightly, or however often you decide to run the processing. Typically people do it nightly, so the data is going to be fresh at midnight, and the next morning you'll be able to refresh any of your pivot tables, and you'll have all of the data that was entered the day before. So at night it's going to take your GP source data, use integration services to pull it into the data warehouse, and then it will be available in Excel. So let's take a look at some examples. So I'm going to demo a few pivot tables, and we're going to take a look at what it actually takes to get to the data. Okay, so inside of Excel, I have a blank pivot table right now. Nothing's happened. I just opened Excel. I renamed a couple tabs down here, but that's just for my own reference. I haven't done anything except open a blank Excel worksheet. The first thing I'm going to want to do is connect to the analysis cubes. And I do this on the data ribbon. And this is an inherent ribbon in Excel. There's no add-ons. This is default Excel. Then I would choose from other sources and analysis services. You'll notice there's a little cube diagram right next to that to kind of help you remember that it's an analysis cube. And then I would type in the server name. This server name is going to be something that your DBA would need to give to you. My example server is KKelly 2013. After you do this connection once, you won't need to do it again, and I'll show you how you can retrieve that connection the next time. I'd also like to point out that the credentials I'm using are my Windows authentication, so I'm not typing in a GP password. And then I'll select Next, and I'll see that I have cubes to choose from. Each individual cube is going to relate to the data that is most logically connected to that information. So if I choose financial, that's going to be my GL level data. And then I'm going to select Next, and this will tell me my connection information. This file name is pretty long, so I usually pare it down a little bit and get rid of the information in the front. So it just has financials for easy reference. And I do that to the friendly name as well. Then I'm going to select Finish. This is going to tell me what kind of information I want to start with. So do I want to create a pivot table, a pivot chart, or just create a connection? Pivot table is where most people start. If you're already familiar with pivot tables, then this is going to be pretty intuitive. Pivot chart, you can either go directly to or build a pivot chart off of an existing pivot table. And a connection is going to be used if you're starting from a cube formula. Cube formulas are a little more complicated, but they definitely have their advantages. I'm going to use my existing worksheet and place it into cell A1. And I have a pivot table. So the first thing you'll notice is pivot table fields over here on the right. This is a lot of information. If you're familiar with pivot tables, usually this would just be a list of your data tab. There's a lot of little arrows that are going to consolidate all of your information. The first thing I'm going to do is choose my Show Field drop-down list. So within the Financials cube, I have 3 different distinct pieces of information that I can look at. I can either look at my bank transaction, which for GP is going to be received bank documents, so deposits, receipts, that kind of thing. GL multi-dimensional analysis, if you're using it. This dimension can also be hidden if you don't want to use that and you don't want anyone else in your company to be using it. Or GL transactions. When I'm in financial, GL transactions is going to be the most common that I'm going to use. So you'll notice a couple of the fields disappeared when I did that. What I'm left with now is all of the dimensions related to GL transactions. So my bank information went away because banking is not directly related to a general ledger transaction. So the first thing I'm going to do is decide what data to look at. I'm going to choose the GL amount. You'll also notice here I have budget, credit, and debit assigned amount, which is going to be a IBIS field. So if you deploy your cubes straight out of the box, you're not going to have that field. This is a piece of data that we have come up with. It's a calculation that actually takes the correct sign of the data. So if it is a credit, it actually puts a negative sign in it. As well as some pre-built calculations, including gross margin, gross profit. These calculations can be adjusted or customized, or you can create a new one if you need to, using SQL Server analysis services. The next thing I'm going to include is the date, because I want to know when this information occurred. If I just check the box next to date, it's going to pull in my hierarchy of date. And if I drop down this little arrow, it's going to show me all of the information related to that hierarchy, including the year, quarter, month, and day. So I'm going to get all of that information all at once. If I look back in my pivot table, you'll see that my first piece of data is the year. If I click the plus sign, it's going to expand down to the quarter information. And I'm using the Fabricam database, so you'll notice that the data is not going to look like a standard database because the sample data is not always consistent. So I only have quarter 4 information in 2013. If I expand that down, I'll see my month, and if I expand again, it goes all the way down to the day. So all of that information is included in my hierarchy. If I don't want to include a hierarchy, I can expand my More fields and choose that information one at a time. So maybe I only want to see my data on a year-by-year basis. I can pull that into my pivot table and just look at the summary data. For this demonstration, I'm going to use the date hierarchy. I'm also going to include the account hierarchy called Accounts by Category. Accounts by Category is a logical summary for the accounts located inside of GP. So Assets is going to be called the main category. Under Assets, you have a broad category of either current or fixed. And then under that, you have Account category. And then again, you have Accounts. So if I continue to go down my hierarchy, I get more detailed into the actual transactions. This information is stored within GP, as well as the account category. The broad and main categories are stored within analysis services, so those can be customized if you wanted to include current assets, fixed assets, and then a separate, maybe soon-to-be current assets. Inside of GP, I would select an account, and my category is going to be a required field. And then within analysis services, I would choose what main and broad categories to roll up into. All right, so now I have a really fast report that I can instantaneously look at my account information over a period of time. I can drill into the details if I need to by expanding my hierarchy. By the time I get down to January, maybe I notice a problem with my data. That number doesn't quite look right to me. At this point, I can right-click, go to Additional Actions, and drill through Transactional Detail. And this will give me the exact information behind that number. I will have additional detail, including the debit and credit amount, the exact account that it hit, if I'm using multi-currency or not, the balance type. So I have a lot more information here that I can view when I drill in. And that drill capability is there automatically. You'll notice another sheet got made when I drilled in, so I can either go back to my hierarchy tab, or if I'm still on my drill through, I can right click and delete that tab. Okay, the next example I want to look at is my salesperson example. So I've already looked at the financial cube, but if I don't want everyone on my team to be looking at financial data, maybe the warehouse manager shouldn't be allowed to see financial information, I can give them access to just the sales cube. So I would need to create another connection from other sources, from analysis services, and choose the sales cube this time. Since I've already done that on my computer in the past, I can go to existing connections and view the connections that have happened already. The financials connection is the one that I created on the previous tab, and these demo connections down here are the ones that I've created in the past on this computer. They're connection files saved on my computer. I can get to this information by going to My Documents, My Data Sources, and that is the default location where these files are stored if I need to delete or add or modify these in any way. After that connection has been created, I can select it. So I'm going to choose Demo Sales because I want to create a sales pivot table. From here, I'm going to open, and it's going to skip over all of that information, connecting to the server, selecting the cube, renaming it, and it goes straight to creating a pivot table. So I'm going to say OK. Now I have a new list of fields available over here on my right. So if you'll notice, I have a little summation character, and that's going to correlate to the values. So anything in this category is going to be a value. That could be a dollar value, a quantity value, a calculation, a percentage. Anything lower that has lines, a blue box with lines, is going to be a dimension. These dimensions can go anywhere in my report, so that would be columns, rows, or filter. If I expand the More Fields section, if it's just a single checkbox, this is going to be called an attribute. So it's an attribute of the higher dimension. For example, customer name is an attribute of the customer information. So I'm in sales. If I drop down my Show Fields list, I notice that I have pending sales as well as sales detail. Pending sales are going to be my unposted sales documents. That would include orders, back orders, and the sales detail information is going to be the posted documents. I'm going to choose sales detail. And I'm going to add in a little bit of information related to my salespeople. Excuse me, I'm going to skip over and look at customers first since it's my first dimension. So here I'm going to include the quantity sold because I want to see the total number that's been sold to a customer over a period of time. Then I'm going to include the master date, and I'm going to put this in my columns so I can see a spread year-by-year comparison. And then in my rows, I'm going to include the customer name. These are all the customers that I have inside of my source, and I want to compare them. This is a pivot table. It's going to give me my raw data immediately. It's going to be a lot of numbers, and it might be difficult to decide how you want to look at that information. I want to know my highest quantity sold to any customer. So to do that, I'm going to take my grand total, and I'm going to sort largest to smallest. And that's going to show all of my customers now organized in order of their quantity sold. And I don't really care down here about the number of customers that I maybe had to give a rebate to. That's why they would have a negative quantity or a return. And those customers that I've sold one quantity to are not really my big sales, so I don't care to have them in my report. So to do that, I'm going to go up to my row labels and do a value filter of top 10. This value filter of top 10 items is going to pare down my information so I only view the top 10 customers that I've sold to. That makes my pivot table a little more condensed, and it targets that information that I want to see immediately. I have Aaron Fitz 001 inside of my GP company as the customer number. If this doesn't mean much to me, or if I have just a number sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, that might not mean a lot to me. So I might want to include my customer name as well. You'll notice the pivot table gets a little funky looking. I now have one record for each customer number and name. So to put these next to each other, I'm going to do something called tabular. So I'm going to use my customer number because it's on top, and I'm going to choose field settings, remove the subtotal, and change my layout to show in tabular form, and say OK. And this will now show my customer number and name right next to each other on the same line, so I can analyze my data a lot quicker. The next thing the analysis cubes help me to do is look for data inconsistencies. So if I'm using my smart list on a regular basis, I might be filtering on a particular piece of information. The cubes are going to help you identify if that is the correct piece of data to filter on. For example, if I go up to Data and create a new pivot table using my existing connections, I'm going to look at the sales information again. If I look at my posted sales information, sales detail, I'm going to include a hierarchy called Customers by Location. When I include this hierarchy, you'll notice that I have United States, US, and USA. So that shows me somewhere in my source system I'm not being consistent with the way that I'm putting in countries. If country is an important piece of information that I look at a lot, and I filter by USA in a smart list, I might be accidentally leaving out my United States and my US customers. Using cubes, I can drill into this information and see exactly which customers are incorrectly marked. And then I would be able to go into GP, adjust the information, and then have up-to-date data to view. Alright, well, pivot tables look very pretty, but the next thing I want to look at is some pivot charts. So if I go back up to my data ribbon, I'm going to choose an existing connection for receivables. Receivables is going to be my information that's customer related. That would include any credit memos as well as sales documents. I also have my aging information to choose from in receivables if I wanted to view my receivables aging based on particular customers and document due dates. But for right now, I'm going to look at my receivables revenue dimension. So here I can make a really quick report and hand to a salesperson based on their revenue. So if I have revenue as well as my salesperson dimension, I I have salesperson by territory, but in my more fields, I also have salesperson ID and name. So I'm going to include name. Now, since I didn't include a date, this is going to be every piece of data in my source system, so I would always recommend including a date. If I check the box, it's going to automatically put it in columns, but I'd rather just see it in filter as a total in one column. So I dragged it up to the filter area. In my expansion, I'm going to choose a particular period of time to look at. So in 2014, quarter 1, I want to see the sales. I included posting date. I'm going to take posting date out and put in master date. The difference between that information, posting date would be the date it was posted, master date would be your document date. Now I want to look by document date right now. So I'm going to choose 2014, quarter 1 in 2014. And here I'll be able to see all of my salesperson revenue organized. If there's an unknown, that's typically going to mean something like the salesperson was not recorded on a sales document, so it would be unknown. Now right now I have a lot of numbers and it's a little hard to see what's going on, so I'm going to sort from largest to smallest, and I can see that Paul West was my top sales guy for quarter 1, 2014. I can also add something called data bars to make this a little more visual. So on my home ribbon, under conditional formatting, I'm going to add data bars, which is going to highlight the sales information very quickly, very easily, and very visually. Instead of looking at numbers, I can instantly see that I have 2 top performing salespeople, and everyone else might need a little bit of attention or extra incentive. Now that I have this pivot table built, I can use this again and again. It's an Excel worksheet, so I can save this Excel worksheet, open it up tomorrow, and refresh the data. I can also use this to look back in time at previous time periods and compare the past and the present. I can also switch my data filter to now look at quarter 2, and I can see that Lynn is my top salesperson for quarter 2. I can then dynamically move my information into the columns and compare year to year who my top performing salesperson is. Off of this information, I can also create a pivot chart. If I insert a pivot chart, I can choose from my standard Excel report. So I don't have to do anything else except choose a standard chart type inside of Excel, which most people are familiar with or have done at least once in their life. So from here I can include a chart type, and this will create a pivot chart off of my pivot data. From here I also have a filter for master date, and I can change the date on my chart, which will update my chart as well as my pivot table. I can do one or the other exclusively, or I can do them in tandem, whatever is a little more meaningful to you and whatever way you like to deal with it better. Is converting to formulas. So sometimes formulas can be a little more handy than the pivot chart. If I have additional salespeople, this is going to continue to expand. Maybe I just want to see Paul West. Maybe this is a report that I hand to Paul West and he continues to refresh and view his own sales every month. I can gear a report to only look for his particular information. So if I open a new tab over here, I'm going to add a new pivot chart from my existing connections for the sales information. And from here, again, I'm going to look at my posted data, and I'd like to view my customers by class. If I'm a salesperson and I'm responsible for a particular class or several classes of customers, I might want to view their data over time. So I can include master date, and right now I have no data right now because I haven't selected a measure to look at. So if I go back up to the top, I have profit and quantity, which might be meaningful to my salesperson. Right now I'm just going to look at profit. Money is pretty important to most people. So from here, I have included all the information I want to look at regularly. If I don't want my pivot table to do any expanding, I'd rather format it, make it look nice so that I can present it to someone. I can go up to OLAP tools, convert to formulas, and all this data will be converted to a logical calculation using cube member and cube value formulas. So now I'm looking at my cube member for a period of time. Since this is a formula, it's reaching back into the analysis services, and it will continue to be refreshable. If I open this worksheet again, I can go to the Data tab, choose Refresh All, and refresh everything in my workbook. You might have noticed that it flashed a little. It was pretty quick. You'd notice if we were looking at it day to day and the data was changing. But this data is still refreshable. It is still a live connection. And from here, I'd be able to do anything to this chart. I can bold and start formatting to make it look nicer if I wanted to put it in some sort of format. Well, I hope that gave you a snapshot of what the cubes can do. There's a lot more than what I've showed today that you can continue to build. And I'd like to show you something I've built in the past as well called slicers. Slicers are a tool that is enabled for, I believe, Excel 2010 and up. Might even be in 2007. I apologize for not knowing the version. If anyone has a specific question about that, I can get back to you on the version. If I insert a slicer, I would be able to control multiple pivot tables off of the same slicer. So if I change my month to be January instead of February, my pivot tables will refresh based on that data. I don't need to come in and refilter both pivot tables individually every time I want to make a month change. This can be really handy if you have an entire worksheet dedicated to a particular cube, like sales. If you're handing this to a salesperson, again, you could choose just a particular month and continue to update it each month and open it, click your month, and all of your data would refresh. You wouldn't need to rebuild this report. You also wouldn't need to ask anyone to regenerate this report. As long as you have Excel and you are granted security to the analysis services database, you would be able to refresh it yourself. There's no need to ask someone else to send you a report. Okay, if I jump back over to my PowerPoint presentation, I want to talk a second about security. So like I mentioned, Windows authentication is the way that you would connect to the analysis services. You do not require GP or ERP username or login. And the information is role-based, which means you can filter security based on a particular cube. For example, if you only want the accounting team to be able to look at the financial information. You can also use the role-based security to only grant access to a particular dimension. For example, company. Company is a dimension that I didn't use in my examples because I only have one GP company as my source system. But if you have multiple GP companies rolling up, you can filter on a particular company for a security role and only grant access to a particular company. Another fun thing I want to leave you with is an embedded chart. If you have a slide deck that you often use to present at the end of a quarter, at the end of a year, you'd be able to embed your cube information inside of your PowerPoint presentation using Excel and refresh it. This would keep you from having to copy and paste existing charts or from having to recreate it every month. So I'm going to jump back over to my computer and show you that chart. So in my PowerPoint slide, if I have the chart embedded in my PowerPoint, I can edit the data using Excel. and this will open an Excel worksheet. First thing you'll notice is that it asks you if you want to allow this security. This will also pop up when you open your Excel worksheet after it's been saved with Analysis Cube connection. It will mark it as a potential security concern, and it will inform you that it's a data connection. Data connections should be enabled, so you can choose Enabled. And you'd be able to open your Excel worksheet. From here, I can either change the date or I can refresh my data. Let me show the chart at the same time here. Might be a little tricky. After I change my date, the data in my pivot chart is going to refresh based on my subset of data. So now I have a new chart that's updated with my new quarter information. All I had to do is open my pivot table and refresh. The cube formulas are also very handy to use if I am creating dashboards. Dashboards could be its own whole webinar, if not more. So if you're interested in dashboards or anything more complicated than that, please keep an eye out for any future webinars. Or contact IBIS directly if you would prefer to have training, individualized training, or training for an entire group of people. Alright, so that's all I have for you today. I hope that was intriguing enough for you to take another look at Analysis Cubes. If you have any questions at all, please email info@ibisinc.com.